the New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host Paul Spain, and great to have Stephen Phillips joining the show again today. Stephen, how are you?
Very good, thanks Paul.
Excellent, excellent. Maybe you can remind listeners where you fit into this big, wide world of technology in New Zealand?
Yep, been in Tech New Zealand for more than 30 years, mostly in the security and telecommunications sort of spaces. Currently work for a company called Snyk. Snyk's all about actually helping software people actually build securely and fast.
Excellent. Well, look forward to diving in and get a little bit of an update on what's happening in the world of Snyk later on in the show. But we've got a bunch of New Zealand and global topics we want to delve into. First up, just doing some back of the envelope calculations on information that we've had released about our cell towers in New Zealand. And my quick answer was we've got over $3 billion worth of cell tower business, I guess you could put it, in New Zealand. We've had news through from Vodafone, $1.7 billion for their tower company, $1.1 billion for Sparks, of which Spark sold off $700 million worth. And then, of course, you've got 2 Degrees who are at this stage are holding on to their tower assets. And when you look at these sales, it's not just the infrastructure; it's also a commitment from Spark and from Vodafone to these the firms that are buying their tower infrastructure, the land they're probably on and leases and all that sort of stuff, the physical towers. So yeah, some pretty big numbers, right? What do you make of the size of these sales? When I was just looking through some of the numbers and a very quick look, we saw half of Vodafone being bought by Infratel going back what must be about 3 years ago now, and they were paying around $1 billion for a 50% stake in Vodafone. Now we're seeing just the tower part of Vodafone New Zealand being valued at 1.7 billion. So I find it quite fascinating.
Yeah, I think some of these classes of assets are probably at the time were underappreciated. But if you cast your mind back further to going back 15, 20 years, there was a whole lot of players putting fibre all around the place. And in the end, it turned out to be too capital intensive, and the government stepped in because they could see that this was a strategic sort of asset. And I think some of these asset ownership companies that this is being sold off to have realised basically that there's actually value in owning these assets in the long term. And at the same time, you've got the service providers like your Sparks, your 2 Degrees, and Vodafone, who are trying to actually make their balance sheets actually less capital intensive, so that they can focus basically on using their investment to create basically more profitability. So it helps take things off the actual balance sheet. So I think that's probably what's going on here. And long-term asset companies who want really steady, stable return on their assets, there's going to be no time in New Zealand history going forward where a cell provider infrastructure is not going to be required. So it's not going to be retired. I don't think we're going to see it go up into space or anything like that. So it's a really good long-term asset.
Yeah, look, I think we're going to need cell towers. Obviously, there certainly is stuff happening from a satellite connectivity perspective, but looking 20 plus years out, that's pretty hard to do on any sort of technology and telecommunications. Fiber, maybe a different one. I mean, it's so, I guess, future-proof, and just in terms of its reliability and its performance and its scalability, that infrastructure. And anyone that listens to this show knows, I think that's one of the best things that New Zealand's ever done is the investment to put fibre in the ground. But yeah, we're going to need cell towers for a long time to come. How it sort of plays out over time and what the complexities might look like, or the sort of exclusivities are as well, in terms of, 2 degrees wants more coverage. They already have, varying things in place behind the scenes, for instance, or if there were ever to be another player come into the market, having this infrastructure, owned separately, and how that looks. But I think there's probably some interesting things to delve into there. It would be fascinating to have a look at these agreements and to see some of the fine print. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but it'd be very interesting.
Certainly, as we move to things like sixth generation, or 5G, 6G, the more of this type of infrastructure is going to be required, because you need it for faster processing. It's got to be closer to the cars and the likes. Good investment, I think, for them.
Yeah, well, we'll see how that plays out. I looked at some multiples, and I mean, it did look like quite a long payoff if you look at sort of the numbers, what the numbers might be today. But if you look longer term, and I'm sure there's all sorts of things built into what these cost structures, how they will grow over time, and what the return is. And maybe it's a really good investment, although it did catch my attention that there was Canadian teachers
pension fund
fund that was investing, and I think in fact the same one that had bought Yellow Pages off Telecom back in the day, I think about 15 years ago. And that didn't end up being a very astute investment. So anyway, probably not New Zealand's issue how that plays out for an offshore non-New Zealand investment fund, I suppose. In fact, the more we can get for an asset if we're selling it off internationally, the better in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there you go. Let's see how that plays out. Now, we saw coverage that Europe, the European Union, are looking to put in speed limits on all new cars, and an ability to control this so that drivers effectively have to behave. And so this got me thinking about what would the New Zealand angle on that be. And I've just been on a bit of a road trip, and putting the Tesla autopilot sort of through its paces, comparing where it is now to where it was 3 years ago when I was first able to go on a reasonable road trip out of the city, a few days away, and testing the technology. It's certainly come a long way. One of the pieces of technology that's been added in through software update to Tesla over that time is the ability to read speed signs, and that works reasonably well. And so my understanding is that look, if this happens in one place, it could the world often tends to follow, right? So how would Kiwis feel about that? I think probably all of us want to see a road toll come down.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, we like to have a little bit of freedom, right? Yeah. And look, there was some vehicles that I overtook today, and when you put the pedal down on an electric vehicle, you can move pretty swiftly. And I probably wasn't looking so much at the odometer, but my son tells me that I went a little bit faster than what might be sort of 5Ks over the speed limit in this particular overtaking scenario. So yeah, are we gonna lose all of that, and should we? What do you think?
I think there's a lot of factors and math that needs to be looked at, because sometimes accelerating quickly can get you out of an accident, but certainly sustained sort of speed well over the speed limit is probably something that should should be regulated against and enforceable through systems. I think whoever's going to be doing this is going to need to make sure they actually get it right, because you don't want to get this wrong because people's lives are on the line.
Yeah, look, that's probably a fair approach, and they talk about 25,000 people being killed on European roads each year. Obviously, our population's a lot smaller, so I'm not sure what the exact numbers are, but it's tended to be probably 1 point something people per
Percent of
day.
global, yeah.
If you worked out how many people die on New Zealand roads, which is that's a lot of families getting impacted, and we now have that target in New Zealand of getting it down to zero. And I think, some of these things you might never necessarily get down to zero, but if we look at autonomous driving and better and better, smarter and safer technology, it can all play together. And so, maybe this is one of those things, but you've got to get that balance right so that
incremental gain.
Yeah.
I think it's good.
Yeah, I like that thinking around. If someone's sort of sustained driving at a crazy speed, then at some point, having the technology able to control that. What happens when it's the Prime Minister's motorcade?
Well, I talked to a prior Prime Minister who used to go very fast up my road, and I had that conversation with her in the plane, and very shortly after, basically, they never came up our road anymore, but they still got caught down in Timaru. So it's quite interesting.
Well, there you go. Okay, so maybe there will be ways to override these things. I'd be curious if anyone's got any thoughts. There is that balancing act that we need, isn't there? When it comes to these sorts of things. Now, on the local front, I saw that New Zealand startup called Authsignal has been featured on Product Hunt today, and for those that don't know, Product Hunt basically is a website where every day new software is featured, and you go in and kind of support the things that you like and give them upvotes and so on, and so you can see what the top software is for the day. And it's a really handy little site if you are trying to promote some new software. Authsignal sort of caught my attention because it's a New Zealand startup. And I'll read what Justin Song, and I hope I've pronounced his name reasonably correct. Maybe we have to get him on the show at some stage. But he says, "My name is Justin. On my first day of my last job, I walked into my office hoping to be greeted with high fives and fist pumps. After my company's first big fundraise, I got the opposite. I walked into a burning fire where my company, FinTech, didn't realize they had been credential stuffed for 3 months straight. Just as I was walking through the door, they were facing the onslaught of account takeovers. I spent the next 3 years learning about the world of scale-ups and how it creates a big target for fraud." So quite fascinating. I'm not sure whether that particular fintech, and I'm not going to mention any names. I was curious and had a little bit of a look on LinkedIn where they were going to get that attention, but there you go. But Authsignal looks like a pretty handy tool for software developers and enabling their sign-ons to be done without passwords, or basically handling the authentication piece, and also tracking activity around those sign-ins. Where are people signing in from, and so on, and I guess an ability to have some analytics around that stuff, which often I guess software vendors might find some of these things out later. So looks like a good idea.
Yeah, certainly authentication is absolutely key to all modern sort of software. And some research that came out in December last year, 90% of all of the banks, all of the crypto exchanges, all of the fintechs have actually got broken authentication in this space. So there's a lot of organizations now in the race to solve this problem. You've got Google, Microsoft, Apple, all trying to move to the passwordless. You've got other players in New Zealand like Meta who have been trying to solve the distributed authentication problem. But this is really, really big, and it's a great market to get into, and I really, really hope that they're able to actually crack some unique advantage to be able to sort of take something Kiwi to the world.
Yeah, well, it's always good seeing Kiwi firms out there doing innovative things, and certainly hope that that what they're onto is very, very good. And if it is, no doubt we'll start winning some export revenue. Looks like they've got a free tier.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was up to 1,000 logins, and then paid tier, and it seems like a reasonably affordable product.
Yep.
Probably they're in a reasonably early stage, so.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it'd be very interesting to look at what hoops and things that they're jumping through.
Yeah,
because early stage for startups is often it can be quite challenging in terms of actually being super secure. But when you're offering an authentication product, you've
got to get it right.
You need to put a lot of effort into that stuff. So no doubt they've been working pretty hard on that front. But great to have New Zealand firms working in this space.
And very brave taking that product-led growth. And it's taken takes some companies about 5 years or so until they actually start getting into the big revenues sort of coming in. So you've really got to have a lot of confidence and that the problem you're solving is worth solving.
Yeah. Oh well, let's see how they go. Now on the international front, was reading about a tracking bracelet being given, and these are sort of wristband bracelets being given to Beijing residents to be worn 24 hours a day, 7 days straight, being issued to some returning domestic travellers in the northern Beijing residential district, and then this being basically internet connected and providing a whole lot of data back to authorities, body temperature, and so on. The app itself having access to phone location, camera, microphone. This was according to state-sponsored media in China, so this wasn't sort of some whistleblower. So yeah, just quite fascinating, and with technology that's developed by Beijing Microtech sensing technology, which is backed by Tencent, and they seem to be getting a bit of pushback, a bit of backlash on Weibo in China. Not surprising. I would have thought you start giving people, making them feel like prisoners wearing anklets, and yet tracking more than a prisoner anklet actually tracks. It's I don't know. It's kind of mind blowing, but you understand that China has had this this continued elimination strategy, right? So of course you're going to look to technology to help.
Yeah, I think they're probably right. Having more signals into how basically disease spreads and early warnings, I can see that actually being an advantage. I can't say that having a health tracking device basically is a bad thing, because I use one all of the time, and I'm just hoping that the companies where all my data is going basically have got it under control. But I think Chinese residents are probably a little bit shaky about this at the moment because just in the last week or so, there's been more than 1 billion records basically sort of gone somewhere that they shouldn't have. So maybe
about
the
Chinese residents
maybe they
getting
do
let loose. Yeah,
maybe they do have a reason to actually be concerned. So it's all about actually how well the data custodians actually look after it.
Yeah, and how does it get stored? Is it anonymized? Are they using it to pinpoint individuals and then slap extra controls on those who are their body temperature's risen too much and all sorts of things. It can definitely look and feel pretty Big Brother. That said, we've heard that the previous surveys of Chinese residents seem to indicate that most are pretty happy with the incredible level of surveillance and cameras in some parts of the country.
Yeah,
that feeling that it keeps them safer. I guess you sort of feel that way until the camera's sort of pointing onto your property or into your front window, or until that thing that's tracking is around your ankle or around your wrist, right? Like it's there are upsides overall if the data's kept secure, if it's used in a reasonable and respectable way, and that's the challenge that we have, and we've seen that neither private organisations or governments can be entirely trusted when it comes to data. It's just a really, really hard thing to do to keep things secure.
Yeah, just 2 weeks ago I was at KawaiCon, and the people who put together their My COVID app went through all of the process they went through to actually make sure that people's personal identifiable information was properly looked after. So I felt confident that the New Zealand government had this sort of under control.
Yeah, look, I think that was an example where everything that we were told at the time was, it gave me confidence, right? I went in varying media and and said, look, based on what we've been told, this is not something where you're being spied, where you're being spied on. Correct. And if you can get that piece right, then we get the good
confidence,
outcomes. But then
good adoption.
I think there's that temptation to maybe not put such kind systems in place, shall we say. So it's definitely a journey, and I think we do need to keep asking asking the hard questions and demanding governments and businesses to do good things. What are you wearing? Is it a Fitbit? Is it a?
Oh, it's a Garmin.
So. Okay, yeah. All right, now on to other news. WordPress is a platform that's had massive, absolutely incredible success in terms of being the tool that such a big percentage of websites are built on top of in 2022, and it has been for a long time. Now, I was reading that a dodgy, buggy WordPress plugin that allows a complete website takeover was found some months ago, and yet loads and loads of websites are still running this and are getting hit. Reading that, so this is the WP Bakery page builder add-ons, and basically if a cyber criminal hits your site, they can basically upload malicious JavaScript files and maybe take over your website. So not a really good position to be in, but it's a reminder of the need to really maintain and secure all infrastructure that an organization or even an individual runs and operates. And we've now got a situation where there's just a big chunk of websites out there that are open to attack because they're not being properly looked after, and they've left this dodgy plug-in on them.
Yeah, well, it could be as high as a third of all the websites in the world type of thing, right? But it's a lot there. But
it's crazy, yeah.
The software libraries that all of these systems sort of work on are all dependent on developers actually keeping their code up to date. And when they don't do that, or they deprecate it and move on to the next big project, these sort of things happen. There's nobody to actually go back and maintain the old software. So it's a thing that all companies, small, large enterprises, governments, all need to be very aware of this.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we're getting this stuff right just
No.
yet. It's certainly from the audits that my team at Gorilla do of predominantly sort of smaller to medium organisations in New Zealand. We just see such a broad range of issues, and often websites are the last thing actually, especially with smaller businesses, that an outsourced IT provider might be involved in. In-house staff aren't necessarily going to have any knowledge.
Correct.
It'll just be, oh no, that's looked after by our web designer. Well,
Yep.
I'm sorry, but it's not usually a credential that you need to have as a web designer as any sort of expertise in cybersecurity, for better or for worse. It's just kind of how it is. People, they're going to focus on what they do. So, probably a little bit of a nudge there to anyone that's listening and sees an opportunity. There is more work to be done. And look, I think IT providers that look after small to medium business need to be stepping back and taking that sort of big picture view and not just saying, oh well, my client gave me this mandate to look after this small area. Somebody needs to be giving them a nudge and saying, hold on, you've got a security issue over here that needs to be looked after. And look, full credit to any and all web designers and web firms who are onto it enough to look after cybersecurity, but it's not necessarily the top focus.
Top of mind.
There are some absolutely, which is great, but we need to be well aware of these sorts of issues.
Even like clubs, basically in the last week in New Zealand, club websites that take payments basically for memberships, all those types of things. Poly, the payment provider in that space, has had to take its plugins sort of offline this week in New Zealand. So, clubs, people running e-commerce shops, all those types of things have these types of problems all the time. And you've got to actually have a professional sort of managed service to do that, because, as you say, the web designers basically aren't across this sort of level of detail, and businesses want reliable services for their for their members and customers to use.
And you should be able to have these things sort of looked after in a trustworthy manner. Now, another thing that caught my attention, this is a bit of a different angle, but it's been reported by CNN and others in recent weeks around Japan making online insults punishable by prison time. This is not just sort of 24, 48 hours, but talking about 1 year. So it's a reasonable sort of size chunk to get for making an online insult. And I again, this is one of those things that I find is really fascinating, and it's really hard. How do you get the sort of the balance right of giving a level of free speech and not having everybody getting feeling hurt by every little comment that gets that gets made online. I'm hoping I haven't offended anybody with my comments about web designers, and I'm not in Japan, so but we've got our own rules here in New Zealand. So how you get that sort of right balance in terms of the things that are said, and then what is the appropriate way for laws to respond to, whether it's a tweet or something written somewhere. And of course we've had defamation rules for a very long time. What technology and social media has opened up is the ability for anybody, anytime, to throw a comment out there, which in years gone by, wouldn't have happened in the same way. And there is that, I guess, that aspect online of, certainly for some people, of throwing out comments without really thinking about the fact there's an individual at the other end that's actually got to deal with that. And so we see things that are completely different in terms of what lands than what might happen if you were face to face with that individual. Are we going in the right direction on this stuff from your perspective, with putting some structure in place and some penalties?
I think this is a good move. I think the legal framework needs to evolve in this space, both for how individuals communicate. This is just a different media that lends itself to people actually hiding behind anonymity and the likes. So that needs to be changed. So the whole, the power sort of balance between somebody making these types of comments and somebody being able to actually protect themselves from those comments is very different through the use of technology. So I think there needs to be an evolution of the law about how you communicate. But I think there also needs to be something on the actual service providers to actually help detect when these things are going wrong, because anonymity is the problem, right? So you've got to find the balance basically of that, and then figuring out where's the line, how much control is too much control. So I think it's going to take us probably a decade or more to actually try and get some of these things right.
Yeah, we are on this ongoing journey now. In some countries, we've seen variations. There was one case in the US, Michelle Carter, who was a Massachusetts woman who was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. It was over a text message, over an SMS. She encouraged her boyfriend Conrad Roy, to commit suicide. Really, really sad, situation. And she was released from prison now, I think about two and a half years ago. But yeah, I mean, to me, that's an example of the extremities of what can happen through. This one was via text, but it could have been a tweet,
any channel, right?
Or anything else. So sometimes the traditional laws actually will apply to a scenario. I mean, that one I think was at the very extreme end. The fact that existing legislation was able to cover it.
Yeah.
But how you get that right sort of balance, I think there probably is no perfection. As probably is the case with most laws today. There'll be some people that maybe should be convicted of things that manage to not be, whether it's police stuff something up, or there isn't the right amount of evidence, and kind of vice versa, right?
Correct. And the police find it very difficult to act when they don't actually have all of the details and the full context, and that's difficult today with the current state of systems.
Now we've seen crypto and having a pretty hard time over the last couple of months or so. The term crypto winter being sort of thrown around. You've had Bill Gates sort of calling it a Ponzi scheme. I see China, who they've got their own stuff going on as far as blockchain and currency and so on, but generally also slamming crypto as a bit of a Ponzi scheme. I find it fascinating because on one side you've got some very very talented and successful and innovative people that have been driving things forward in terms of crypto, Web3, NFTs, all these things, and a lot of money that's been thrown into them. Of course, prices can't keep going up forever. It's a little bit like our property here in New Zealand. We've seen it going up and up and up, and there's been that sort of expectation that, well, that's what the past X decade shows us. So you can keep throwing your money in; it's going to keep keep going up, much faster than inflation and so on. Sometimes these things don't necessarily stack up. So that's been interesting. And then alongside it, you were mentioning a security audit company that has actually been adding up some of the losses when it comes to the blockchain world from varying hacks and so on. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that aspect of it? Because it's certainly been this idea of the individual being their own bank had some things to like about it, but the security aspects to me have been the concerning piece, that there's still a way to go till we find a good place. And I mean, we still see so many people being sucked into varying scams and so on online, and in the blockchain world, those who get sucked in, sometimes it's much faster and much bigger sums can be involved, right?
Yeah. So with the blockchain technology, the fundamental idea of having an immutable ledger that's auditable of this value moved from this party to this party is absolutely great. But it's how it's being implemented is where the problem is, and we're now starting to see the various cryptocurrencies. There's moves afoot by people across the world to actually start putting more regulatory controls and all around that. And that's why I think you're starting to see a lot of people basically exiting the market, because it comes back to that anonymity thing again. You can get things being used for unintended consequences. And I think NFTs in themselves as a mechanism of protecting IP, absolutely great. Blockchain, absolutely great. But the crypto exchanges, being used as Ponzi schemes, absolutely terrible use of the technology. So it comes down to that. How's the technology being used? And you're finding some of the companies basically are people when you take money on blockchain, unless you actually know the secrets, you can't get the money back. It's gone. And there's some nation states basically that are taking advantage of that. So I think you'll find the West in particular is probably going to try and actually sort of regulate that sort of to the point where it's no longer a big factor.
Yeah, and of course, just in the last couple of days, we've been hearing about Russia putting a new law into play that bans crypto payments for goods and services. So the world when it comes to crypto is definitely still a fast moving space.
Absolutely.
And, I think if you're I'm just a big proponent for encouraging people to get an understanding of these technologies. But of course, if you're actually going to put real money in, then you want to really know what you're doing. But it is. I think it's really, really useful to understand the new technologies that are coming through and gaining your own understanding. But when it comes to putting large chunks of money into these things, you want to really understand that, know what you're putting at risk, and
Absolutely.
what do they say? Be able to afford to lose it.
Absolutely.
So, you also raised around this Honda security situation with Honda vehicles.
Yeah.
Now, over the years we've often heard about issues with being able to compromise vehicles in certain ways and bust into them. Of course, as more time goes by, our vehicles are getting more and more connected online. So, in many cases, if there's a vulnerability, then that can be addressed by some sort of a software update. Although not every vehicle is fully geared up for that just yet. So run us through what's been happening with the Honda vehicles.
Yes, a number of models of the Honda vehicles going all the way back to 2012 have found that with a $500 piece of hardware, people can actually sit around in a car park waiting for people to sort of open a vehicle, and then they're able to actually replay that and use it later. Rather than actually going to the next sort of unique code, I found a flaw in the way the software was built that allows these attackers to then sort of be able to get back into the Honda vehicles. And the problem Honda's got here is they have to do a full recall of the vehicles and take the fobs back into the dealerships and all those types of things. It's a huge problem.
It's a very expensive game if you've got to do that. And look, I mean, they're not the only one that's been hit with issues, but when there's supposed to be a level of cryptography that effectively means that every time you press your remote, there's something unique that's being issued and so on. When that's not the case, and someone can just play back exactly the same, technique through a computer, that's a pretty major fail. And if you can't just remotely sort of software update everything, then you're kind of stuffed. And it certainly speaks to that benefit of being able to have your phone as the unlocking device for your vehicle, because then you can update that security along the way to one degree or another. So I know with Tesla, of course, that's one of your key things is you've got that software interface between your phone and your vehicle, which is pretty handy. Well, it's worth carrying your little swipe card as
a
well,
backup
in case your phone's flat or something else happens there in terms of coverage. But not a good situation for Honda to be in. And over the last decade or so, they will have shipped out a lot of cars. So
correct.
I don't know how you can how you even address that in a manner that doesn't bankrupt your business. Now, moving on to Snyk, maybe you can give us a little bit of an update since you last on the show around what it is that Snyk are up to and how things are going since you sort of stepped into role here in New Zealand, because there wasn't a huge presence for Snyk in New Zealand sort of before you started, but seems like there's been a lot going on over the past. How long is it now since you've been at Snyk?
Just over about 6-7 months. Really hit the ground properly in the beginning of the year, sort of January this year. But our mission's really is to help cloud native software teams, and there's a lot of cloud native software teams in New Zealand, about 39,000 developers who are building software out to disrupt the industry, to take New Zealand developed software to the world. Enterprises are using software, governments are using software, software's eating the world, as it were. Even the cars we use today are really APIs wrapped in sheet metal. So that's how pervasive software is becoming. But the challenge is that developers, Kiwi developers, as well as global developers, are actually building software just like Kiwi builders were building leaky houses a few years back. In research that's just come out from Snyk and a lot of the Linux sort of industry sort of players like OpenSSF and the Linux Foundation are finding that 76% of organizations don't know what third-party software is in use in what they're building and whether it's safe.
Right, because when you build software today, there's usually that use of varying other bits of existing software, open source components, and so on. Right, that's how you deliver something that has the features and capabilities and so on you want without having to build everything from scratch yourself. So
correct.
Monitoring that stuff's got to be quite critical. Having the right tool. So that's sort of where Snyk comes into the picture. Now, I was looking. You've got a sort of a freemium type thing where is it smaller organisations can sort of jump in and get access to some of your pieces at a nil cost, and then depending on what an organisation needs, they might need to front up with larger chunks of money, and I guess relates to probably the value that they would get out of the software.
Yeah, so small companies like sort of Authsignal would use our software for free if they've only got 4 or 5 developers and all those types of things. So so they can actually look at all of the other software, which is typically 90% or more of the software that organisations use. It comes from these third-party libraries. Only about 10% developers write themselves these days. So it's the free model, and then we have for larger organisations who have bigger I suppose sort of assurance sort of requirements, sort of regulatory requirements, sort of at that end basically is where you start paying basically for what we're doing. But what we are really focused on is the root of the problem basically is unfounded trust. So developers trust the code that they are writing, and they also trust this third-party code that they're bringing in, but they actually shouldn't. They need to actually look at, is it trustworthy? And the code also trusts sort of authentication mechanisms. So companies like Authsignal and the likes are actually starting to solve for some of that type of a problem. And then cyber criminals are now starting to take advantage of all of this third-party code. So they're looking at old projects that have, maybe the developers moved on to something new, and they've taken over it, and they've put some malware in there, and next thing you know, basically you've built something that's able to have all of your data basically sent to some other entity.
Yeah, well, that stuff can happen just in this. Somewhere I remember chatting to a friend in Australia. He he'd built a startup, and a key piece of how they were promoting this was through Facebook. Now, whether he'd forgotten, whether he was asleep at the wheel, however you want to put it, his Facebook account was tied back to an old domain name that he had registered in New Zealand. It expired. Somebody, figured out, joined up the dots. They registered this domain name, took over his Facebook, his credit card, was spending thousands of dollars a month in advertising, and brought his operation to its knees through this this hole. And but that was just that one business. But that sort of happens to an open source project. Someone takes over an account and is able to control a project that might be used by 1,000, 100,000, 1 million, 10 million,
correct,
other code bases, and you're relying on that, then that is really, really extreme, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's governments, utilities, all sorts of companies all across New Zealand are getting caught out by this type of a problem. 650% more year-on-year increases we're seeing in what's called software supply chain vulnerabilities. So this is the problem that sort of it's starting to really explode. And unfortunately, that the actors that are exploiting this are really sort of like they're starting to head away now from the likes of phishing and business email compromise, where somebody takes over your email account, because the controls in that space are getting better. Apple's just brought out
are still happening, but they're harder.
It's getting harder.
The better
right?
people move along on that front.
So Apple's got the lockdown mode. There's passwordless. There's two-factor authentication. All of those things are making it a lot easier to actually protect yourself from when somebody's targeting you as a human. So they're starting to move now to actually attack the software supply chain. And that's the part that Snyk really looks at.
And really important for New Zealand, for our economy, for us to be able to trust the New Zealand software vendors, our government, and so on.
Correct.
That these things are really being looked after appropriately. So, it's great to see you getting that out into New Zealand market. So, thanks for sharing that with us, Stephen. That's fantastic. I think that brings us to the end of the episode. So thanks everyone for listening in. Great to have you listening this week. Of course, a big thank you to our show partners, Cyclone and Aruba, 2 Degrees, Vodafone, Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology. Great to have these companies standing behind the New Zealand Tech Podcast, supporting the show, not only just the New Zealand Tech Podcast, but of course, this flows out into supporting the broader, tech and innovation ecosystems here in New Zealand. So definitely, companies that we appreciate having in the space. Stephen, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach you?
Probably Stephen Phillips on LinkedIn, or any place where good developers can be seen at DevOps summits, Cloud Native summits coming up. Wherever there's developers, you'll find us.
Okay, that's awesome. And thanks everyone for listening in. You can, of course, catch us at nztechpodcast.com. If you've been watching the live stream, which we tend to do most Tuesday afternoons through LinkedIn Live, Twitter, Facebook Live, and YouTube. If you've been watching that way, you can, of course, just listen in via a podcast app. And if you're listening in via the podcast app and you want to catch it a bit earlier, then look out for to follow us on on one of those platforms, so you get the latest and greatest as it comes out of the horse's mouth, as it were. If I'm calling myself a horse, well, there you go. Hey, thanks everyone. We'll catch you again next week. See ya. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.